Yeah. Okay. The session is recording. I'm going to start. So, all right. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to another expert session number 117. So, just before I start, let me say thanks to our sponsor, Acclaim AI. Acclaim helps enterprises deploy AI agents into regulated environments where compliance, control, and execution matter. That makes this conversation relevant because the real AI question is no longer whether companies are adopting it. It's whether they are deploying it in ways that are that actually create measurable value. So what is Evolve? Evolve is a global private network, an operating layer connecting senior commerce leaders, advisors, founders, investors, and operators across market. The sessions are designed to surface operational realities, strategic shifts, and market intelligence before they become obvious. Our expert today, Kate Minogue, former Meta leader, now consumer AI executive, fractional C-suite advisor and strategist, working at the intersection of AI, product, and commercial execution. Kate has spent years operating inside large-scale consumer technology and now advises businesses navigating AI adoption from the inside. Her work focuses on an increasingly important question: where AI creates real enterprise value and where it simply creates noise. So, just for some context setting, global AI spending is projected to exceed 300 billion USD in 2026. Nearly every board now has AI on the agenda. Yet, according to recent enterprise surveys, more than 70% of AI pilots fail to scale. Fewer than 20% of companies report measurable financial return, and many teams are measuring adoption, not outcomes. This is creating a dangerous pattern: activity mistaken for progress. Dashboards move, pilot numbers grow, internal excitement rises, but value creation remains unclear. I'll share later some of the examples that work, such as Klarna, Shopify, and Duolingo, and where some companies struggle, such as Air Canada's, Google AI Search, and some retailers. So, Kate, I always start our sessions with a controversial opening question. And the question for you is, most companies today measure AI success by number of pilots, number of users, adoption rates, internal engagement. But none of these necessarily measure value. So the question is AI becoming the biggest source of corporate waste disguised as innovation?
I think 2026 is the first time we're really seeing AI as waste and AI's true cost. And I still don't even think we're seeing complete costs yet, because there's still subsidization happening of a lot of AI. There's still unsettled pricing and unsettled business models and things like that. But it's the first time we're seeing really big bills landing for tokens and compute and things like that. And that's where people are starting to wake up to the reality that AI is not an infinite resource. It's not a free resource. And I think for a long time, because the overwhelming narrative from big tech companies was AI is efficient, AI is low cost, AI is cheaper than people, that people never really questioned, well, what does it actually cost? And the cost is not just how much do we pay to the provider of, say, the utility, as Sam Altman kind of talks about it. It's like electricity, you can just pay for it. It's also the operational cost that happens within the organization when you don't have a good strategy or a good roadmap for how it's being used. So I think we're seeing AI as waste in two different ways. One is we are running up token bills for things that we have no idea the return on the investment of them. And the second is we have so much fragmentation in organizations where people are testing AI for different things and they maybe don't have the technical understanding of the different cost of different AI activities, that it's also causing operational costs between teams. So duplication of the same workflows between teams, or a lot of different implementations that are started but never go anywhere. And then they just sit on people's computers, sit on platforms, and they don't go any further than that. So I think where we're seeing waste is, people talk about failed pilots. And I think when we try to conceptualize what that looks like, it looks like time wasted for the people that, put in effort in ideating them, starting to get the teams together, putting the research in X, Y, and Z. But it's more than that. It's all of the different things that were attempted to move in the organization and slowed things down or had a longer knock-on effect. And then it is the actual tangible cost of AI. And we're seeing headline after headline now this year about how AI is more expensive than junior employees, which was the exact counter argument to what we had last year. I think the first company that came out and said this was maybe a VP of machine learning in NVIDIA. And understandably, his team are experts. Like, they are highly qualified professionals, and that's the context he's speaking about. But he said, we have now hit a point where agents and compute are more expensive than if we had an entry-level employee doing the same work. So we've already passed through the cost gains and out the other side. We had Uber come out and say that they use their entire year's budget for AI. Was it in one quarter? Well, less than a half. And today, I think it came out that Meta have a $50,000 per employee cost in tokens with their current run rate of spend. That's on top of the salaries of those people. It's on top of the undistributed costs of their infrastructure. So I think if you look at the general organization, like not big tech, not super digital native, you have a lot of organizations that haven't even hit the beginning of what the cost of AI is through each of those different layers, and also don't have the architecture and engineering and procurement experts in-house that will see this coming. I was at a CIO conference a couple of weeks ago where it was a lot of IT professionals that were talking about this, and they were very, very worried about security of democratized agent building in AI, but they were also very worried about unforecast costs because they were losing the ability to see the activity that was happening in the organization because it was bottom up instead of top down. And if we went back a year, that was seen as a positive thing. That was seen as what C-suite and leadership were pushing is, experiment, everybody try it. I think it was the SoftBank CEO came out about 12 months ago and said, I want all of my teams building thousands of agents. That is the height of waste. It's like, well, why? What are those agents for? What are you doing with them? I think Amazon had to really urgently cease token maxing tournaments and leaderboards because they were incentivizing adoption to such a high extent, AI adoption for AI adoption's sake, that they found people were performatively building things that they did not need and did not need to use. And all of these things probably started with good intent, which was we want to get out of discomfort with AI, unfamiliarity with AI. And if we can get to adoption, then we can get past adoption to value creation. But I think that intent was naive because the technology has changed in the last 12 months. And it is far more expensive now to run the most sophisticated models that, say, OpenAI and Anthropic have widely available. It is far more expensive to run an agent that has access and autonomy to a lot of different systems than it is to run a single standalone prompt. And it is far more expensive to run prompts on formats beyond text than it is to run a simple chat with ChatGPT. And if you take a standard employee in any organization, a frontline employee, they're not looking at an agent versus a prompt or an image versus a video and thinking about the unit cost of that activity. And if they run the same image 15 times because it's not quite perfect, you don't have people taking away the cost of that in their head. It's not their money. They may never. But I think we need to take a step back and say, what have we let out into the wild of organizations without putting structure around it?
Brilliant. Thank you. Great answer. Davor, you are the guy who's implementing this every single day. So I think there are a couple angles there in terms of costs, in terms of in terms of value, in terms of common sense, because that was actually the topic of our session about almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when I asked you what was value, like, and you have to reverse engineer what business people want, and then what the technical team wants, and then come to a certain conclusion in terms of how the product is going to look like. So as someone who's implementing AI solutions on a daily basis, that's your bread and butter, perhaps if you could comment on Kate's remarks in terms of costs. I think that's very interesting, right? How much it costs to create something, and then perhaps you have a question also for Kate as a follow-up question there.
Yeah, first I must agree with almost everything that Kate said. So yes, this bottom-up approach was good for learning. Learning was a curve that everybody needed, but now, yeah, we understand it, but it became very chaotic. And in many organizations just don't know what people are doing there. From our side, as a company that comes from outside and does specific project based on ML models, costs can be driven down with engineering, good engineering. Either you use some older, much cheaper models that are really good enough for the task that you need. So that's most common solution and the easiest one. But you need to understand how to measure the outcome to understand, is it good results that you're getting or not? So that's really the usual way how to do it. Or you can go for open source solutions, but I must admit, I'm still quite surprised that for open source solution in a business environment, you need a scale. If it's too small, then all the, I would say, things around it, where to host it, how to have security, how to keep the updates, actually drives cost again very high. So open source models are good, but you have to have enough knowledge and enough scale so that brings the price down. And for the smaller companies, that's usually not feasible. And if you want to try something new, then you go for state-of-the-art models because maybe they work better. But then, yes, your costs are through the roof. So I would say from our point of view, things are quite chaotic. It's very hard to predict where they will end because the prices of token started to raise up this year. It's completely unclear where they will be. In my opinion, things will go more towards engineering solutions for more complex and more business critical tasks where you put the models in some kind of short loops, control them, understand the token usage, and you have now the tooling around this is also being developed, so it's now much easier to control and monitor what the models are doing. So things are moving in that way, but it needs some technical knowledge to grasp around it, definitely. So I don't know, maybe Kate, you can bring some more insights in this more engineering perspective, because I think everybody first has this like individual perspective, but there we can't really do a lot. I mean, any one of us, we're just dependent from the providers, but where there are these more engineering approaches to solutions, how do you see it? Yeah. Is it more on what I said or something different from your side?
Yeah, I think it's almost, there's probably two angles to come at this. One is almost the invention of an AI operations role or team, which is, if you're really encouraging of this kind of keeping it decentralized, the usage and everyone having really open access across the organization, then you need to start to implement some reports, some controls, something that centrally allows you to say, okay, here is something that's, we're getting really expensive bills from this part of the organization. Can we do less of that? I think there was somebody speaking from it was maybe Food Hub or one of those apps, the food delivery apps, and they had really cracked a nice process around this that allowed them to do insight-driven literacy with the non-technical employees as well, which is like, listen, here's where we're seeing spikes in usage and here are the kind of things that we want to reduce. So I think that's one approach, is you just need to get a handle on the usage, the patterns, and start to put controls around it. But I think your point is a really important one, which is the engineering skills are so important, despite the fact that a lot of the AI PR was you won't need technical staff anymore. And I think the opposite is very obviously true. And I think that, you know, we see a lot of kind of one-person companies appearing and vibe coding coming in, and that will get you to a certain extent. You can build something, but there are various different reasons why infrastructurally it will break if you don't have somebody who actually understands what's happening under the hood. And I think a good parallel that keeps coming up in the cost conversation is around how we went through this with cloud as well back 5-10 years ago, and at different spikes as the costing and pricing there would have changed. I think the biggest difference for me with cloud versus AI is, one, I don't think you had 100% of your employees potentially pulling on the cloud at various different points in time. Yes, it was distributed, and you might have had, say, a marketing team spinning up a cloud instance for reporting and a product team spinning up a cloud instance. So there were layers of fragmentation, but I don't think to the same extent as AI usage that we have. And the second is, like you said, Davor, the token costs have gone up this year. But also they haven't settled yet. The unpredictability of costs is probably going to go on longer than it necessarily did for cloud. And if I was to add a third thing, it's whole companies exist on top of the AI platforms that have been built now, that are probably not viable businesses if the costs don't go down, which probably wasn't the case with cloud to the same extent. Yes, cloud was a service that was required at a certain level of scale, but now the startups just go poof if they don't have a margin because of the cost of tokens. So I say all of that to say, if you do not have an engineer that is able to bring down compute or bring up compute efficiency, if you do not have somebody that is able to look at the model options and look at the various different workflows and say, here is how we have to change them. Like, I think back to early in my career as a data scientist, and one of the most important trainings you would give data scientists is how to run more efficient SQL queries, because otherwise they were sitting at their desks for 8 hours a day just watching them run and not being able to do anything else with their computers. Computers have come on a long way, like our desktop machines are not doing that, but our companies are doing that now. And it is almost creating a team around that idea, which is, do we understand what efficiency looks like here and where we have the ability to control it? And we need to hire for that. We need to train for that. And we need to put processes in place for that.
I have it's very interesting. I think people want to ask you questions, and I promise you guys that you will ask your questions. Just going to be selfish now, for now. But yeah. But regarding models, and I thought this was quite interesting, Davor. So open source and what do you call? I'm not sure if it's on premise the right term, or whatever we call. So this was not in our script, Kate, but it's more like the philosophical discussion. Like, you have the American models, yeah, and then you have the Chinese models. Like, one say, just go at it, use as much as you can, it's going to cost you nothing. The American model is going to cost you a fortune. And this race, I find it very interesting. And what are you seeing from your clients there? And also you, Davor, are you using any of the Chinese models? And because at the end of the day, it comes down to how much this is going to cost and how fast can you implement solution. I think it's common sense. I'm not an expert, but I mean, it's going to cost you less, going to get faster there. You can have higher margins if it's reliable or not. You know, it's so. Would like to hear your take.
I think there's a third point now that's appearing, and again, this comes down to how dependent your business is on the model. So yes, cost, yes, reliability. We've seen a lot of reasons geopolitically why people also might choose US over China or vice versa. We've seen a push towards, can European companies use European models for AI sovereignty for various reasons? But I think you can take a bigger question, which is, how resilient is your business if something changes with this model? Cost is the obvious thing that's already started to change, but it's not the only thing. When Meta bought Manus, which is from a Chinese company, quickly the US came in and said, no, you're not doing that. There's a geopolitical, or sorry, it was the Chinese government said, no, there's a geopolitical risk here. American company cannot buy this Chinese AI company. And they blocked the purchase. But they blocked the purchase after Meta had already integrated Manus into a lot of their ad platforms and things that customers were already using. So the disruption there was not just whatever Meta lost in terms of the sale, it was also customer workflows and Meta's workflows and things like that. So I think we all have to wake up to what I'm calling AI interdependency, because we built on third party and international products. And as different things shift, as the cost models change, like the US and China have always had different tech strategies because you are not dealing with a purely capitalist situation in China. They can, you know, supplement or subsidize things for longer, but the cost exists somewhere. And I think that comes more medium and long term on these things. So we have to take a step back and go, how much control do I have over my future if I'm using third-party AI, open or closed AI, and local or international AI? Because there are different risks in all of those situations. And what I'm seeing is companies and leaders look for optionality, look for the ability to not go all in on one and be able to slot in and out different models. And if you think about, say, going with Amazon or Microsoft as a cloud provider and using the AI modules that come with them, for bigger companies, for public sector, for, you know, high risk industries, they're going to go that route because the risk is lower, because Amazon will swap a different model in for them, or Microsoft will swap a different model in for them, and they'll never know the difference. So there's no outage. Whereas I think it's in the question that came through about tokens. There's the token cost, but there's also the token limitations. These companies are all of a sudden stopping you from using tokens because they want to save them for somebody else. That's out of our control at the moment. And it's exactly what Davor said, it's chaos. But I think we aren't used to saying, will I not use the American model or the Chinese model because somebody will pull it overnight? We've seen with Fable, we've seen with Manus, the ability of a government to decide whether or not that model is something that will stay available to us. So what I think companies need to be doing is having a very strict risk strategy around AI. And cost is a component of risk strategy. Outage is a component of risk strategy. Dependence is a component of risk strategy. And I know one of the things we were going to touch on was customer facing versus internal AI. Hugely different scenario if your AI goes down and it's customer facing versus it's part of an internal process. So I think a lot of the muscles that we need for this exist in our organization already. And we've been using them for other things. We've been using them for procurement. We've been using them for risk. But I think we need to direct that lens to AI and particularly to third-party AI. Sorry, Davor, I'm sure you have more thoughts.
Yes.
I agree with you. And just to add what I usually say for our potential clients and clients, go for a local model that works locally on your machine, then you are not dependent on anyone and you don't have any security issues. If that works for your use case, just do it. And then the investment in hardware and the hassle around it to put everything working is worthwhile. And I know several use cases here, not only by our company. Usually it was Chinese models locally deployed. People are not really keen to use Chinese models on a server side because all the risk issues, and we are part of EU, so there's a regulation and much more stringent than when you use. Even the US models are problematic, but you know, on the regulation side. But for that, it's easier to say I have a contract with Microsoft anyway on an enterprise level, so it will work. But yeah, my usual advice is go for local thing if it works for your use case, and then regulate individual uses and other things that are chaotic and bottom up. But this is a different story, and they also have its challenges. Yeah.
I still would like to stay on this topic a little bit and perhaps be a little philosophical here, maybe push the conversation, because, you know, like I'm in Denmark, and you would see the Danish Commerce Federation saying, "Don't buy from China. This, you know, it's bad and blah blah blah." But that's the political narrative. When you go out in the streets, you see BYD growing here. You know, so in the end, consumers, we want to buy. I would say, I won't say cheap, but yeah, you want to buy stuff that is affordable, good, hopefully. But consumers also drive in the end. I mean, there's always a political narrative, you know, because the government may want to look good, but BYD is growing here. It's a pity that Hendrik isn't here, you know, because he's the guy who's always he's our analyst in the community. And I find that fascinating. So you take BYD growing massively. China is investing in infrastructure in Africa, for example. They invest quietly. They're not loud as our American friends, right? But they're investing heavily. And so it's more on this point of the, you saw Anthropic going against the American government, was it, right? Saying, okay, yeah. So in the end, I mean, I think we have to be aware that there are no saints out there. You know?
I think what you're alluding to, and what my personal feeling on this is, we hear a very US centric view of good versus bad tech. Exactly. And the US obviously has also had influence with the EU's regulation and what Davor said about these different things. The consumers don't necessarily have the same beliefs. And I think we saw this with the TikTok ban in the US, where the US were certain nobody would want to use TikTok when they found out that it came from a Chinese company. But in actual fact, the American users pushed back. They said, we don't care. We want to keep using TikTok. We don't care if China has our data. And I think that if you talk to a lot of American people, they don't love their own government having their data. They don't necessarily feel worse about the Chinese government having it. And if they do, it's based on a narrative that has been fed to them, which is, as you've said, a political narrative. I don't personally feel better about America having my data than China. That's not my perspective on the world. I think you have to think about, in general, where is your data going, what's it being used for. But my decision as a consumer does not come down to US good, China bad, or any variant of that. I think we saw it as well when DeepSeek landed with, I want to say, no marketing, that it did so well in the App Store because people used it, they liked it. You say that's China, they don't care. BYD is also quite big over here. So I agree with you. I think that when we see the US versus China, and its biggest influence on us, I think, is the AI arms race that they have created between the US and China, that, the US tech companies use to get a carte blanche from the US government to do whatever they want to do is, well, we can do this because otherwise China will catch us. That's the biggest impact that it actually has on the user in the end, is their decisions are being made under that umbrella. And so that impacts the products that are rolled out, and then that impacts the user. But I think we saw what happened when Anthropic said, I'm going to stand up to the US government, we're not going to do certain things. And their consumer adoption went up very high after that. Because what that hit was an actual consumer value. And that was, we do not want to be complicit in a war. That was the actual thing that the consumers cared about. It was not US versus China. It was, okay, Anthropic have taken a stand. They don't want their models or technology used in war. So we like that. So we're going to start using that product. And I think that is probably more of a lesson. I think that when you deal with AI products, it's the most transparent case of a company and leadership's values appearing in the product and becoming part of the features of it. We've seen that chart that's going viral in the last week about which of the models is most left-leaning politically from the Washington Post. So what that showed was OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepSeek, not that dissimilar. Like, they showed both sides of politics. They also showed left-leaning. They were very unlikely to show what the US would describe as right-leaning politics. X had more right-leaning included. Are we surprised by that? Not really. Elon Musk has been vocal about the fact that he wants his definition of free speech to include right-leaning things in it. And Google was the only one that had almost exclusively showed both sides of the argument. And the reason for that is Google is already a publicly traded company, already a consumer tech company, and has already been scrutinized for political influence. So when they roll out the features of their model, they don't stop at, is the model biased? They put controls in at the end. They put comms rules in at the end that say, we don't want political influence. We're going to say, I can't comment on that, or we're going to give as close as possible to facts on both sides and arguments on both sides. And I think that's the difference between an AI lab launching a consumer-facing product versus a consumer tech company. But it's also the difference between influenced and led by a government versus influenced and led by shareholders, consumers, things like that. So I completely agree with you, Carlos. I think the China versus US argument has been inflated to be more important than it is to consumers, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have a downstream impact on what it is consumers actually interact with.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Davor, any remarks there?
Yeah, consumers don't care if they can use things,
No.
but the problem is from day to day, things can change, and then you can't use some models.
You can't use it.
We've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we do need a sovereignty from EU side and some
Mm-hmm.
kind of models that we can count on that will stay here if we use them.
Mm-hmm.
And for real business, you really need that predictability. It's really, I would say, even it's hard to put your business online and have something dependent on something that can go out
Mm-hmm.
over the night. And now we see that this can happen. So it's either local model or I bet and I hope for Mistral and others will catch up.
I was going to
And we will
ask,
be able to use them.
how does
in
Mistral
local market.
compare in your experience with companies?
Not really good, but mostly because they are lacking the ecosystem around the models. Not only the models are a bit behind, but it's the Mistral is, in my opinion, as a company, went to the big B2B as they're oriented to this, and they're really not developing the ecosystem for smaller guys to develop this ecosystem. And until they decide to do it, it's very hard for us to sell it to our clients in this situation.
And that's not to interrupt you both, but this is actually the next block here, and I'll ask. We'll speak about ecosystem strategy, and then I'll shut up, and then everyone can join in the conversation. So it's more like I think this conversation about should you build, buy, or partner. So Kate, you are advising companies on probably this. So how should they evaluate? How should they think about AI partners, and are they becoming too dependent on platforms? What's the way to?
Yeah, I think 2026, people have seen that they're becoming too dependent on individual partners and individual models, because I think 2025, everyone started assessing the best model and maybe the best pricing plan, but not really the best strategy. Again, when I go back to being a data scientist, I would have thought it was insane to let somebody else build your model. Like, not to build in-house was just not done. And obviously LLMs broke that, because the best foundational models can only be built by a few at the cost and the scale that they do. So I changed my mind, and I would have said, yeah, of course, why would you build something that you can get better in the market already from a platform? You'll put your head down for 6 months and the technology will exist, and you'll have wasted time, and you should instead refine or improve upon it. I think now we're seeing phase 3 of that, which is probably somewhere around both. I think we should be still very aware of what is available to us from partners, but we should be assessing that not just from a perspective of what is the best model, but also what does it mean for my workflow operations and business model if it's third party. And I think that almost brings us back to an old outsourcing conversation. Like, how would we have assessed whether we do something in-house or offshore or outsourced? We should ask a lot of the similar questions. I want to talk about commerce specifically, because I think that one thing that comes up a lot with commerce and e-commerce and retailers is you've got an existing ecosystem of partners. Like, there's already quite a complicated stack. And when I talk to clients, the very first thing I always say to them is, what do you already have? So what is your existing tech stack? What is your existing set of partners? And is there a need to build something from scratch or onboard a new partner if there's something almost as good in the existing tech stack you have? Because what you're doing there is working with a company that you know probably won't disappear in the next week or month, but also you're not increasing your operational complexity by adding an extra partner in. Like, this is already somebody that you have some dependency on. So I think looking at, say, whatever your existing tech stack is, and saying it is more beneficial to me to use what's available, even if it's not the best in the market, because the other costs and the other risks are lower. And then I would say, yes, use a partner, but make sure you're maintaining that optionality or you have a contingency plan. So maybe you are taking out of the box what Claude or ChatGPT or whatever have, but you're also considering what would it take to build a local or a small version of this that would get me to a higher level of control. And I think every organization is different in terms of which risks it's easier for them to absorb, which costs it's easier for them to take. And a lot of that comes down to, where is the AI in your organization? So is this just a very generic administrative support, or is this a core part of your customer-facing product? The risk is obviously very high if it's a core part of your customer-facing product, but also the need for it to be differentiated is higher if it's a core part of your customer-facing product. So I think that the decision needs to follow that structure. We would be naive not to use what is available from these American tech companies, from the big tech giants. But I think we have to also have our eyes open about what does it mean for us when we do. So I think it's all about like a good audit of your existing tech stack, what you can gain from their AI features, what is available out of the box, and then what risks have you introduced if you are building too many operations or products on top of things you can't control.
Fascinating. Davor, in terms of ecosystem, what's your best advice?
It's very hard to give an advice because things are moving very fast. In my opinion, the whole agentic things that are coming upon us very fast are changing a lot. And it's very hard to say where will this land. It's bringing additional complexity. You should, if you have IT resources, do it from the engineering perspective and control your risks, data, and everything. If you're not, then you probably can just, from the consumer side, choose one or two models and change them in between. But as I said, in Europe, I think we have the real problem that there is no agentic system that is compliant with the AI Act. AI Act was written before agentic systems, and it's very hard to prove any agentic system that can be compliant under it. So it's very strange. Nobody talks about it. I think we actually have a problem on this. Yeah, it's very hard to control. The system does some things autonomously, and if you go through regulation that's here in place, you shouldn't do it like that. But not only AI Act, have in mind the older legislation, GDPR and Digital Services Act as well. And when you take this complexity, sometimes I have a feeling we will all have only the startups that will do the legal tech part of legislation and nothing else at the end in Europe. Which is not a good perspective. It gets too complex sometimes when you try to put them as you should. Yep.
Thank you. All right, so I'll open the floor here for our community. And the first question was from Peter Davor. So Peter, if you want to open your mic and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. It was when you were talking about the costing and everything, and it just seems like everybody's forgotten how to plan. It just seems like it's over celebrating chaotic distributed stuff, and it's like in any proper project, you know, you need to plan. If you want to go to Edinburgh, you need to plan how to get to Edinburgh, otherwise you run out of fuel halfway there. And that seems to be what's happening with all these projects, that everybody starts doing something, then they find the cost of tokens goes up and they can't do what they were planning to do. And it's like, well, that's because they never actually planned. You know, the number of these projects, you get senior management say, we want to use AI in compliance, and say, oh, excellent, that sounds exciting. I'm really keen. What do we want to do? We want to use AI. No, but to do what and how and who's going to be on it? And it just seems like AI, everybody seems to think they can switch off their brain and it can do it for them. It's kind of scary how to work with management to sort of get them to sort of get around it and say you've got to do some heavy lifting beforehand. And I was in a terrifying meeting where was talking about, you know, about this sort of, you know, these projects where you do try and get AI to help you with the compliance. And then they said, well, you know, when you get into the testing, you can't test it on a sample select. You know, it's not like a good old system where, hey, you know, normal distribution and everything. If you select 10% and it works, then it works. No, because the system might just deliberately throw in some random curveballs for an entertainment. Oh, and by the way, you need senior people to check the outputs. Oh, and by the way, you need to check it each time. It's not like, oh, we built this sodding thing. It's defined. I remember when I started off as an auditor, and, you know, back in ye olde days, you know, computer auditing was a new thing. And we had this crusty old guy come in and he said, you know, you've got to remember that user-friendly means auditor hostile. And it's like the more flexible it moves, the more hard it is to believe that it. So it's trying to factor those things in. I mean, how have you seen those sort of issues, and have you got any solutions? Because at the moment I find myself being, you know, this awful sort of, you know, grey-haired naysayer on the sidelines. You know, I'm trying to help people work to make things, but you've almost got to get them to understand the problems. But then it's like, okay, Peter, so how do we solve those problems? And it's like, yeah, good point. I'm not 100% how you do.
Yeah, I think anyone who has been AI critical in the last year and a half, 2 years, that has been interpreted as anti-AI and anti-progress, which I don't think is the case. Like, my job is AI and I'm AI critical, and it's because I want it done well and I want it to actually make a difference and make a positive difference. I actually ended up launching a digital course called the AI Leadership Lab to try to solve exactly what you're talking about, Peter, which is the non-technical business leaders. And I say non-technical meaning how they self-identify, the ones that maybe feel they don't have the technical capabilities to do the planning you described. You know, they don't feel they can actually be the one that says, I can forecast the future. And also they have that CEO that's saying, just sprinkle AI on everything and I don't care what else it is. What business leaders need to be able to do is to find the questions, I guess, that get to a better outcome, instead of being always that voice of, I call myself a nag, the party pooper in the room that's like, but here are all the reasons this isn't fun. And I think really it's bringing it back to, what were the problems you were trying to solve before? And I think what's tough about your example, Peter, is compliance was one of the problems they were trying to solve before. They didn't invent that problem to do something with AI, which other teams have. It's like just invent a problem so that we can put AI somewhere on the plan. Whereas, they probably did have good intentions that said there are some known pain points in compliance. Could AI be the solution to solving them? What they didn't really follow through on was what's different about AI as a technology versus, say, the digital and deterministic solutions we were previously used to bringing in, where there was more predictability, there was more ability to forecast, we could scale up a sample test, and there was just that linear path from pilot to reality. And I don't think leadership updated their expectations. And I think all of the noise where people say they had success, but the success is a little bit suspect. You're like, did any of that success actually really happen? Just made it harder for people in organizations that were trying to push back, because they were then met with, but everybody else is doing it, and isn't it going so well? So I think what I would usually say to those leaders is, A, bring the examples of how this is not going faster in other organizations. Like, I keep seeing the IKEA success story going around the last couple of weeks as to, they used AI to do 47% of their customer service. And then it was a big success story because they didn't fire people. They repurposed their customer service teams into outbound sales and X, Y, and Z. And it's a gorgeous story and I love it. But people are not paying attention to the dates. 2021 is when they built that chatbot. Between 2021 and 2023 is when they measured the improvement in customer success. Between 2023 and 2025 is when they repurposed to actually, this is what nobody wants to pay attention to, is where you do see success, it is a long time coming. And they have failed multiple times and improved and iterated. So I think that's the first thing I would say is, people's AI success stories are like Instagram. It's not real. Like that's just curated for social media. The second thing I would say is it's about questions. It's about grounding them back in questions. Well, what are we trying to achieve? What is our definition of success here? Why are we using AI instead of something else? And not in a contrarian way, but in this will help us to build a better project. Because to Davor's point, we wouldn't be running out of tokens if you're happy to use a less sophisticated model, because that's actually sufficient for this. We don't need Fable 5. None of us need Fable 5. Fable 5 is beautiful, but do we need it? No, we don't. So I think it's about getting enough information from them that we can anchor the project in more reality. And I get it. I think it's a tale as old as time that C-suite can be the challenge here. They want all of the shiny objects, but I think we're very past shiny objects now in 2026. So it's about, okay, wouldn't we just like to have moved forward in the next 6 months? So how can we do that?
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Peter, I have to move on and have another person asking questions. So thank you. Vinod.
Thank you for pulling me in. Carlos, I have to say, as you know, I've been in several Evolve conversations and webinars. This has been, I'm regretting not taking notes.
Yeah, the bar is very high here, Vinod, as you know.
it's getting higher every session. I don't know how this is happening. But Kate, thank you so much. This has been just listening to Kate and Davor and Carlos, the three of you, sort of pull this conversation forward. It's been interesting and exciting. I have three things, but I'll keep it very brief, as brief as possible. The common theme is, like we say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So the first thing that you mentioned, the rampant use of ungoverned use of AI, it reminds me of YouTube, oddly, because when YouTube came out, we did not have Mr. Beast. We had a whole bunch of cat videos,
yeah,
right? And we did not realize how best to use this. So we were trying different things. What worked were cat videos. People like to watch them. So I'd like to think that today we are in the cat video stage of AI. We are trying different things out. We are token maxing. We are throwing spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks and what doesn't. And to do that, all these things are necessary. Somehow, somewhat ungoverned, somewhat unstructured, borderline dangerous. Checking in your cloud.md file into your GitHub so that Netflix ships its Claude generated app to its users. Stuff happens, but that's no, I think that's part of the evolution of this technology. I wanted to mention that. But the other thing that came to my mind around cost control and token cost control, as you were talking about it, is about 15 years ago, when the previous wave was SaaS, SaaS CRM, SaaS ERP, we are e-commerce platform on SaaS. So today's agentic was the SaaS from 15 years ago, right? And it happened because of AWS and GCP to a large extent, right? And we thought we were saving money by not having to buy our own servers and our own T1 connections, and that we could just build and serve to millions of customers and audiences by building on top of AWS. Costs didn't matter, but forward 10 years, for the past 5 years, AWS cost control is one of the biggest line items in a CFO's task list, right? The role of DevOps, cloud ops, was born out of having to have better cost governance around AWS usage and AWS bills. And if I were to draw a connecting line between that and what that resulted in, don't you think there's this concept of AI ops that might develop now, given the use cases that we're studying now? Maybe there's a role called AI ops, and maybe the core job to be done within AI ops is the understanding of the cost model between owned models versus borrowed or paid models, and sort of the evolution of that. So it just occurred to me as you were describing the cost situation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned earlier, that example from Food Hub where they actually have AI ops, and it has started. And I think you're right, for any technology that gets this embedded, there is an ops function. And I think that person needs to understand not just the compute and tokens of it all, but also all of the other costs that Davor mentioned around. If you do decide to go open source, there's probably more of an upfront cost, but then you have more controllable costs down the line, and so on. So I definitely think that's needed. I think that exactly like with cloud, the ground is moving under us right now in terms of these cost models. Like, we don't know where they're going to land. And we end up getting into very philosophical and political discussions again around data centers. Where will they be? How will they be powered? What governments will subsidize one company over another and the usage of them? I saw an engineer friend of mine say recently, we will see a day in the next 5 years where an Irish startup is denied power because the government has committed it to big tech. And I don't think we're dealing in such transactional utilities yet, but it's coming. And I think that is a reality that, again, is outside of our control, because unless they make more sustainable choices about compute, or like Davor says, at different stages of the ecosystem, the efficiencies are brought up, then these things can just explode, and they will become outside of reach for certain companies and certain teams. But I think the AI ops is the route to control that we have. To your earlier point, I agree with you to an extent that experimentation is part of this curve of innovation. But I think, exactly like you said, we can learn from social media and video platforms before, and maybe not take the training wheels off to the same extent. We maybe are less naive to how bad things can get this time round. We just saw butterflies and rainbows the last time, and then we realized maybe things can get worse. So what I often say to business leaders is, do you have no-go zones? Do you have high-risk zones and safe zones? Because if we have shadow AI and experimentation and fragmentation, the absolute minimum AI policy that any organization should have is, we don't use AI for X. They have outlined what they don't do. Because I think every employee can benefit from that. And I think that is the bare minimum that we need. Now, I live in the EU, so that is not the bare minimum policy anyone's ever going to get away with here. But we can at least start with don't touch zones that are in the intent of the beautiful EU AI Act that's coming for us. Because I think any CEO can start there, and then that approach can trickle down, which is experiment, but please don't touch our production code for something. Like, any engineer knows the don't touch things. And I think we are seeing really weird examples of data leakage because of prompt injections, because agents are put in the hands of non-technical staff. And I think there's going to need to be 5 or 6 really big headline scandals or fines before anybody wakes up to those risks and says, oh God, I should have put more controls in. I sometimes joke, half joke, not really, and I'm saying this because I'm the only woman left on the call, that sometimes women see the worst case scenario of technology sooner because we've felt it faster. And I think that's true of social media. We probably would have predicted how bad things would have gotten on YouTube if you'd asked us. But there were men saying, but it's cat videos, how bad can it get? So back to Peter's point, listen to the naysayers in your organization as well, because sometimes worst case scenario is what you need to hear to build guardrails and risk assessment around it. And I think we're probably at a good inflection point in AI to start listening to not just the doom and the boom, but also the critical people that are kind of just inside each one, and say what training wheels can we put back on so that our experimentation can take us further.
We need more pragmatists like you in the industry now, for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you. Do we have more questions? No? No more questions? Santosh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I can't be on video, but I have been listening to this wonderful conversation.
Okay.
And I have been curious about, it was a talk about, companies burning through tokens on top of salaries and stuff. And here I'm thinking I have replaced 3 of my team members. I don't miss them a bit. So what is the missing link here? Because it's a fascinating, powerful tool. Are we not using it to its capability, or is it designed to be inefficient at certain levels where you take 4 steps forwards, 3 steps backwards kind of stuff? Because I have seen this firsthand, that I've been using Claude Code with Telegram. It's quite liberating. I can do my Google Ads campaigns while walking my kids, playing with them in the playground. And it does stuff for me, which is very, very empowering. But I'm thinking about, in the bigger context of things, is it really not to the point where it can actually make us more efficient, or is the cost really outweighing the value? I don't know if I'm putting my question across
No,
properly.
I think your question's really clear. And I'll hand this over to Davor, because I think he's definitely closer to the day-to-day of this. But I would say 2 things to start. One is, when we say AI is better, we have to really ground ourselves in than what are we coming from? And the 3 employees that you kind of started with, the specific work they were doing, the way they were working, things like that may be different, and the tasks that you're speaking about may be different. I think one of the biggest things to call out is, yes, you're right, at a certain scale, those prices start to go up, but also it's not consistent from one work type to another. And that's where we lose the control to a large extent. And that's where I think that, companies like Meta are getting a rude awakening. They have, tens of thousands of employees, a lot of technical staff, and things are getting out of control for them. But it's also an AI in everything. I heard an example of an Accenture call where they said huge amounts of administrative staff were converting PDFs to slides using AI. And that was a very costly thing at the scale that it was happening. And I think what we need to pause with there is, that's not a operation that needed AI. It's an operation that potentially for a non-technical employee was easier to do with AI, but the frequency that they do it and the compute that's required on that level meant that it was very costly in aggregate. So I think that it is definite. There are efficiencies to be gained in AI. There's no doubt about that. But some of those efficiencies could be gained in automation without the intelligence underneath it, and some of those efficiencies could be gained more efficiently if there was more planning to go into it. So I think it is very much down to, well, what did you start with, and what is the work you wanted to do, and what is the scale that you're going to hit? But I think it is the consistency and control that we all need to have our eyes open to. But Davor, maybe you could shed more light on the specifics of where that cost's appearing.
Yeah, I think the main thing is, it's now here 10-ish of us, but everybody has such a unique perspective on how he uses AI and what he understands and knows. And we all have to have in mind that these systems are much more interactive with our own knowledge to actually produce something. So it's very individual, and it's very then hard. So there's just a few use cases where it's easy to, I would say, automate work because it's so uniform and repetitive. Like, okay, customer services are one of the use cases, and what you mentioned now, maybe optimizing Google Ads or something like that. But the things are usually much more complex across companies. Processes are much more complex, and people have such a different variety of understanding the technology in general, and then AI over technology. So things are getting very complex, and this actually brings the cost up. It's not only the token usage, actually the waste of time. So you do save some time, but then you lose time on the other side a lot. So I think things are really, and then as I said, agentic things are just coming to make things even more complex, and we have no idea where will it end at the end in a few years. So yeah, we'll see. If things are just chaotic, and we have to all learn, adapt. And usually my advice for the companies is go for the clear cases and learn internally, and don't push it, because it's not worth to be first sometimes in this area.
And I just want to add one thing as well, is if you're dealing with small, an individual or a small team or whatever it might be, you could be on a very different pricing plan and usage plan than if you scale it up. And then it is just priced and limited in a different way. And it's, you're going to have things trickling through other processes that are running in the background and stuff like that. So like, there's only so much I can spend on an individual or a pro or a plus plan. And I may only kind of set up a handful of agents, and I'm not reaching token limits because they're just simple batches and stuff like that. I think it just gets exponentially more complicated when it goes to more people, more processes, and different plans. So all of those things compound.
Brilliant. All right. So I think that's about it. This was really an amazing session. Kate, incredible. Davor, this was really good. Really, I mean it. So thank you both for this expert session. This is a bit of what we do at Evolve. Now it's been 117 times. I'm very happy about what we've accomplished today. If people want to know more about you, Kate, what's the best way? You're the star here today.
Yeah, so I sent my LinkedIn in the chat at the start. Feel free to add me there. I'm very active there, so you'll hear from me. My website is the same, kate-minogue.com. If you want to check that out, my digital course is there if you know of anybody that you think could benefit from that. If you have business leaders in your organization that you'd like to upskill a little bit on their approach to AI, then send them towards the digital course.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, yeah, and I encourage you all to connect on LinkedIn. If you're in Evolve, you're very welcome to send a message, and I can connect you with Davor, Kate. And thank you all for this incredible session today. Thanks very much. See you next week. Ciao.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Davor.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye all.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.